Right now, in a factory outside Tianjin, China, a machine is ripping apart a dead refrigerator. In about 4 minutes, that fridge will be sorted into neat piles of copper, steel, plastic, and foam. And not a single gram of it will end up in a landfill. Every piece comes back as raw material for something new. That factory is not alone either, because it sits inside a recycling zone the size of a small city. 135 square kilometers of factories do nothing but take apart the things you and I throw away and turn them back into the things we buy. In 2025 alone, China recycled 380 million tons of garbage, which weighs more than every car on every road in America combined. They are not doing it to be nice to the planet. They are doing it because they figured something out that the rest of the world is still catching up to. And it comes down to one idea. The next great mine is not underground. It is in your trash can. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how they are pulling this off, why it works, and why the United States has no answer for it yet. This is not a recycling story. Forget everything you think you know about recycling. The blue bins, the sorting, the feel-good posters. This is about raw power. Think about everything you touch today. Your phone has lithium and cobalt inside it. The wires in your walls are copper. The solar panels popping up on roofs in your neighborhood are full of silver and silicon. The bridge you drove over this morning is made of steel. Every single one of those materials has to come from somewhere, and right now, most of it comes from holes dug in the ground. China needs more of these materials than any other country on Earth. But here is the problem that keeps Chinese leaders awake at night. They do not have enough of them buried under their own soil. Over 90% of the cobalt China uses arrives on ships from other countries. Same with nickel. About 60% of their lithium comes from overseas. They hold barely 5% of the world's copper, yet they burn through more of it than anyone else. That means China's entire economy, the biggest manufacturing machine in human history, depends on other countries being willing to sell them rocks. And in a world where trade wars are heating up and countries are threatening to cut each other off, that is a terrible position to be in. So China landed on an idea so simple, it sounds almost stupid. Garbage is the mine. Remember that word, mine. Not a hole in the ground, a pile of trash. Because that one word keeps showing up for the rest of this story, and every time it does, the meaning gets bigger. To understand why that question changed everything, you first need to understand something about garbage that most people never think about. When you throw away your old phone, the gold inside it does not disappear. The copper does not dissolve. The lithium does not evaporate. Every single valuable material inside that phone is still there, just sitting in a landfill or a junk drawer, doing nothing. And here is the fact that blows the doors off this whole conversation. Old circuit boards, the green flat things inside your computer, contain 40 times more gold per ton than the rock that comes out of most gold mines. A ton of ore from a gold mine gives you maybe 5 grams of gold. A ton of old circuit boards gives you over 200 grams. Your old laptop is literally a better source of gold than a mountain full of gold ore. Read that again in your head, because it reframes everything about what garbage actually is. And gold is just the start. Recycling 1 ton of copper saves the same energy as burning a full ton of coal. Every piece of scrap metal that gets melted down and reused is a piece of rock that did not need to be blasted out of a mountainside. The value is already sitting in the garbage. The question was always whether anyone could figure out how to get it out fast enough and cheap enough to compete with traditional mining. For decades, the answer was no. Digging fresh material out of the earth was cheaper, simpler, and way more profitable. Small recycling companies existed, sure, they melted cans and sorted bottles, but the real money always sat in mining. Recycling was the little brother that nobody took seriously. China followed the exact same pattern. 30 years ago, along the Xia River near Tianjin, families collected old wires and broken appliances and burned them in backyard pits to melt out the metal. It worked. They got their copper and aluminum, but the smoke poisoned the air and the runoff poisoned the ground. A farmer named Yuan Zhejiang watched his fruit trees slowly die from the contamination, and eventually he cut down every last one. That was China's recycling industry, backyard fires and dead orchards. Nobody had any reason to change it either, because China's economy was booming and raw materials were cheap. Mines in Australia, Africa, and South America kept the Chinese factories fed with fresh ore. Buying more rock was easier than building a real recycling system. That all changed around 2020. Trade wars heated up, supply chains started breaking. Countries began openly talking about cutting China off from critical minerals as a political weapon. Chinese planners ran the numbers and saw a nightmare scenario where the cobalt stops coming, the lithium price doubles, and the copper supply tightens to the point of crisis. Their engineers stopped looking for mines overseas and started chasing a very different goal: turning their own garbage into a mine that nobody could ever take away from them. The answer they came up with was so big that it required something China had never built before, and the speed at which they built it caught everyone off guard. In October 2024, the Chinese government created a brand new state-owned company from scratch. Not a small startup, a national giant called the China Resources Recycling Group, backed by $1.4 billion in starting cash. 6 of China's most powerful corporations bought in: the country's largest steelmaker, its biggest aluminum producer, and its largest oil refiner among them. Xi Jinping personally gave the order, calling it a decision that would shape the country's future. When a government creates a company that big and calls it a national priority, that is not recycling. That is a country preparing for economic war. And they did not target just one kind of waste. They went after everything. Every category of garbage that contains something valuable. Let me walk you through what that looks like, because when you see the full picture, you will understand why American companies are starting to worry. Start with batteries. Your phone, your laptop, your electric car, they all run on lithium-ion batteries, and those batteries eventually die. In 2025, somewhere between 450,000 and 1 million tons of dead EV batteries came off Chinese roads. By 2030, that number could climb to 3.5 million tons. That is a growing mountain of dead batteries, and most countries look at that mountain and see a problem. China looked at it and saw a lithium mine. A company called Brump, owned by the world's biggest battery maker CATL, built machines that recover 99.6% of the nickel, cobalt, and manganese inside old batteries, plus 96.5% of the lithium. That is near-perfect recovery. Brump chewed through over 120,000 tons of dead batteries in 2024 alone, and the crushed powder that comes out gets refined right back into the same material that goes into brand new batteries. That means the loop is closed. Battery dies, gets shredded, materials go into a new battery, and the cycle starts over. No mine needed. That is just batteries though, and here is where the story gets wild. Look up at any rooftop in China and you will probably see solar panels. China carries 1.24 terawatts of installed solar power, enough panels to cover an area bigger than some European countries. Those panels do not last forever though. The first big wave installed in the early 2000s is reaching the end of its useful life. And when those panels come down, they are packed with valuable stuff: silicon, silver, copper, and aluminum. Here is the part that surprised even the engineers. The silver and copper inside a solar panel make up 2/3 of its total material value, even though they are a tiny fraction of its weight. And recycling the silicon uses 95% less energy than making fresh silicon from raw rock. In early 2025, a company called Resolar helped build the world's first solar panel made entirely from recycled materials. There is that word again: mine. Now look at the buildings around you. Every time a building gets torn down in China, it leaves behind mountains of concrete, steel, sand, and brick. The country generates 3 to 4 billion tons of this rubble every year, about 40% of all the garbage China produces. Until recently, only 5% to 10% of it got recycled. The rest sat in dumps. Compare that to Europe at over 80% or Japan at 95%. A study out of Tsinghua University found that if China gets serious about recycling demolition waste, recycled sand and gravel alone could supply half the country's demand for building materials by 2050. Half of the demand from rubble. And the steel content in that rubble keeps rising, because modern buildings use far more steel than buildings from 30 years ago. Old apartment blocks are becoming steel mines, and every year they get richer. Now think about the phone in your pocket. China produces roughly 10 million tons of electronic waste every single year. A single ton of old circuit boards holds about $24,000 worth of recoverable metal. And pulling those metals out costs 40% to 90% less than digging the same stuff out of a mine. One factory in Fujian province takes apart more than 2,000 dead appliances every single day. Fridges, washing machines, and televisions that walk in whole and walk out as sorted piles of pure, reusable material. Clothing tells the same story. China throws out around 26 million tons of textiles every year, and only about a fifth of it gets recycled. A company in Kuqiao in Zhejiang province figured out how to chemically break down old polyester clothes and turn them back into fiber that matches the quality of brand new material at 99.9% purity. Not a downgrade, the exact same product. They are targeting 500,000 tons of recycled fiber by 2030. And then there is food. China wastes over 100 million tons of food every year, which makes up roughly half of all household garbage by weight. In Hangzhou, an eco-park squeezes every last drop of value from food waste. First, the oil gets pulled out. Then the solids go into a tank that creates biogas for energy. Then the leftovers get fed to black soldier fly larvae, which turn into high-protein animal feed. Steam from the waste-burning plant next door heats a neighboring factory and saves them 2 million yuan a year. That park is not a science experiment. Its output hit 1.3 billion yuan in 2025. Every one of these, batteries, panels, buildings, electronics, clothes, and food, feeds into the same system, the same urban mine. And what nobody in Washington expected was how fast China would start taking that system global, because that is the part of this story that directly affects your life. Cattle is building a battery recycling plant in Hungary that opens in 2026. GEM, based in Shenzhen, already runs 7 battery recycling centers worldwide, including in South Korea and Indonesia. Goshen High-Tech and Envision Greenwise announced plans to build 100 recycling facilities across the globe. Huayu Recycling partnered with French company Suez to push into the European market. A company called Beautree is constructing a battery recycling factory in Valladolid, Spain. China is not just recycling its own garbage anymore. It is setting itself up to recycle everyone else's garbage too, and to own the supply chain that comes out of it. The numbers back that up. China's output of recycled copper, aluminum, lead, and zinc reached 14.6 million tons in just the first 9 months of 2025. The national target pushes above 20 million tons by 2026. Globally, the recycled metals market is on track to pass $314 billion by 2030. Inside China, waste sorting now covers virtually every neighborhood in 297 major cities, enforced by 199 local laws. When Shanghai launched mandatory sorting, recyclables jumped 57%, kitchen waste collection climbs 27%, and the volume going to landfills dropped 20%. The government target sits at 76% urban recycling by 2030. And that is not a suggestion. That is a direct order backed by real money and real infrastructure. All of those numbers sound impressive on a slide, but the real test is whether any of this actually works in the physical world. Plans and reality are different things. The answer is waiting in the same place this whole story started. Go back to Tianjin, that poisoned stretch along the Zia River, where the orchards died and the air turned toxic. In 2003, the government shut down the backyard workshops and built the Zia Circular Economy Industrial Park on that exact same contaminated ground. Today, it is the biggest recycling park in China, home to over 200 companies running automated lines that strip electronics in nearly dust-free factories. Green space grows where ash pits used to sit. Every year, that park produces enough reclaimed copper to match the output of a large copper mine. Except no mountain got destroyed, no river got poisoned, and no new hole got carved into the earth. A waste-burning plant nearby runs through over 800 tons of trash per day and pushed 120 million kilowatt-hours of electricity onto the grid in 2024. That is enough power for 100,000 homes for a full year, all of it generated from garbage. These are not concepts on a whiteboard. You can walk through these facilities today. They are running, they are profitable, and they are growing. The honest question, though, is whether this works everywhere, because right now, it does not. The biggest headache is the underground market. In battery recycling, small operators running backyard shops with no safety gear and no permits regularly outbid the big companies because their costs are lower. They offer better prices for dead batteries, so they collect the batteries, and a huge chunk of retired EV packs disappears into workshops that nobody tracks or regulates. Construction waste faces different problems. The recycling rate is still nowhere near Europe or Japan. The flow of demolition debris into recycling plants swings wildly from too much to not enough, and recycled building materials still cannot beat the price of fresh ones in most markets. Textiles carry their own trouble. 70% of the clothes sold in China are made from cheap synthetic fabric, fast fashion built to be worn a few times and thrown away. And the recycling systems catching that waste still only handle a small slice of what gets discarded. None of these problems are minor, but none of them change the direction of the money or the technology. Every generation of recycling started messy and got cleaner. The gap between what works inside one factory and what works across an entire country is real, and closing it will take years. The factories, though, are already running, and they are already making money. And that is what brings us back to the idea hiding behind this entire video. A country frees itself from depending on other nations by doing something nobody else is willing to try at this scale. It stops digging and starts recycling. Right now, other countries hold power over China because they sit on deposits of cobalt, lithium, nickel, and copper. That power only works as long as China needs those deposits. Every ton of lithium pulled from a dead battery is a ton that does not need to arrive on a ship from Australia. Every kilogram of silver stripped from a retired solar panel is a kilogram that does not need to come from a mine in Mexico. Every slab of recycled concrete is a truckload of gravel that did not need to be dug from a riverbed. China is building a second supply chain, one that runs entirely on its own waste, one that no trade war can shut down, and one that gets bigger every single year as more batteries die, more panels retire, more buildings come down, and more phones end up in drawers. There is that word one last time: mine. Except this mine never runs out, it grows. The world that ran on fresh-dug ore did not announce its own ending. It just started losing ground to something cheaper, something cleaner, something built by people who were willing to spend the money before anyone else was ready. Meanwhile, the United States has no company like this, no system like this, and no plan to build one. Whether that changes is up to the people who are starting to realize what they are competing against. 20 minutes ago, you probably thought recycling meant sorting your cans on a Tuesday night. Now you know that for one country, it means something a lot closer to economic independence. If you made it this far, I appreciate you sticking around. Hit like if this changed how you think about garbage, and subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this one. And I want to hear what you think in the comments. Tell me what other massive changes you think are happening right now that nobody is paying attention to. Because if a shift this big can build right under our noses, there have to be others.